Broadcasting to you now from a dingy garage turned studio in beautiful northern Colorado, this is Freelance Filmmaker, and I am your co-host, Jeremiah.
And I'm Gwyneth.
And we are here to help you on your journey to become freelance creatives. We are a corporate filmmaking and fine arts photography firm, and we are here to share our experiences, our knowledge, and our lessons learned with you so you have a better chance of succeeding and realizing your dreams in the film world. Our goal is to build a network of creatives and individuals and professionals who are willing to work together, rely on each other, learn from one another, and ultimately make this journey a wonderful one. Welcome to this week's episode of Freelance Filmmaker. We got a really action-packed episode planned for you this week. Tons of pyro, lots of explosions. We took a cue from Michael Bay. They say our pyro guy is probably gonna pull through. They've got like a 25% chance at the hospital, so that's awesome. Michael Bay, homeboy. I'm kidding. We don't know him. Mr. Bay, please don't sue us. We appreciate it. Moving forward. But before we move on to the rest of the episode, quick word from our sponsors. All right, so in today's episode, we have a deep dive into ISO and how your camera sensor works. And then Gwyneth will be taking it off with dynamic range. And then we'll be rolling into, of course, our business class. Then we'll be moving into a fantastic interview with Lance Levesque and Jeremy Kingwell, who are actually getting ready to roll onto a film set themselves. So they're gonna tell you a little bit about what they put in their bag, their philosophy in terms of how they build their filmmaking team. So it's gonna be a really cool episode with them. And then we're gonna have a review on the Zoom F8, our audio recorder. So for those of you who think that film ends with what you see in the picture, sorry to tell you, you're wrong. The other 50% of the battle is in fact the audio. So we'll be reviewing some audio equipment today and our resource recommendations. So we've got a great episode planned for you today. We're really excited for it. So let's roll right into it. So for today, we have kind of a combination class, if you will. Our photography and film class are actually covering some similar topics that range between photography and film. I will be covering ISO, whereas Gwyneth will be covering dynamic range. So rolling into ISO. ISO stands for International Standards Organization, and these folks deal primarily with the measurement of light sensitivity. As we discussed previously in an earlier episode, ISO deals primarily with the measurement of light sensitivity in film stock. So those rolls of film that you would put into cameras, whether they be photography cameras or film cameras. More accurately, ISO refers to the size of the light sensitive particles in that film stock. Each of those light sensitive particles will capture a small amount of the light projected through the lens and take on the hue, color, and brightness of that light. These light sensitive particles are very much like pixels in digital cameras. So ISO 100 film stock has very small light sensitive particles and performs best in bright light situations such as daylight. Higher ISO film stock, such as ISO 800, has much larger light-sensitive particles. Because the particles are larger, they have much greater surface area with which to catch the light. The downside of higher ISO film is those particles are larger, so the picture's not as clear and there's more grain. When referring to a digital camera, ISO is not a measurement of sensor sensitivity. Your sensor has a set sensitivity, or base or native ISO. ISO is just a measurement of the gain or amplification applied to the sensor. It's kind of like a concert. The singer's voice has one volume, but through amplification, microphones, amplifiers, larger speakers, etc., that one volume voice is able to fill an entire stadium. Unlike film stock, on a digital camera, when you increase your ISO, you don't get grain, you get noise. Digital noise is feedback, and it's always one pixel in size and can be multicolored. So, ISO doubles every step up. So it jumps from 100 to 200, 200 to 400, 400 to 800, and etc. Now, each of those steps in ISO, so moving from 100 to 200, 200 to 400, is the equivalent of one stop, kind of like f-stops. So jumping from ISO 100 to ISO 400 is 2 steps, and therefore 2 stops brighter. We will cover stops in more depth in a later episode, but for the purposes of this class, all you need to know is a stop is a measurement of exposure that either halves or doubles the amount of light that affects the final image. Now, as we discussed earlier, ISO is a measurement of how much gain is applied to what the sensor detects. Now, this part is a little confusing, so bear with us. Some cameras have ISO and gain settings, and they're measured as 2 separate metrics. So we'll explain that here right now. While ISO is measured in larger, even numbers, so 100, 200, 400, 800, etc., when gain is available as its own metric, it's measured in decibels. Gain, or the decibels in gain, are similar to ISO in that they double with each step. So 0, 9 decibels, 18 decibels, etc. And same as with ISO, each step is a measurement of exposure that either halves or doubles the amount of light that affects the final image. Ultimately, these 2 separate metrics are measurements of the same exact thing. Simply put, if you increase your ISO by 2 stops, and you increase your gain, again measured in decibels, by 2 stops, you've effectively increased the sensor's amplification by 4 stops. So 2 plus 2 equals 4. Again, measuring the same thing. Base or native ISO is a reflection of your sensor's true sensitivity. Any ISO measurement above your native or base ISO is simply an amplification of what your sensor already detects. Any setting below the base or native ISO is simply a de-amplification of what that sensor already detects. Native ISO is the point at which the signal-to-noise ratio is at its best. Most cameras' native ISOs are generally under ISO 400. However, with our Sony a7S II, the native ISO is 1600. This is because, as mentioned before in our first episode, the Sony a7S II is geared for hypersensitivity, allowing it to perform very well in low light conditions. So again, base or native ISO is generally the ISO setting in which your image will look its best, environmental aspects aside. As such, when your camera is set to its base or native ISO, its dynamic range is at its widest or at its best. Now here's Gwyneth to break down dynamic range for you.
Hey everybody, it's Gwyneth again, and I'm going to talk to you about dynamic range. The technical definition of dynamic range is the ratio between the maximum light intensity measurable versus the minimum light intensity measurable. The less newsworthy definition of dynamic range is the ratio between the widest or brightest part of your image versus the darkest or blackest part of your image. The units of measurement for dynamic range is actually f-stops. The better quality your camera makes for the better dynamic range. For example, a good dynamic range is having a true black and a true white and a wide range of millitones between the two. An example of a poor quality dynamic range is having a true black and a true white with a very narrow range of millitones between the two. Alright, let's look at examples of scenes that will require a wide dynamic range versus a narrow dynamic range. An example of a scene that would require a wide dynamic range would be a sunset or a sunrise. In this scenario, you have a huge variation between deep dark shadows versus bright sun rays. An example of a scene that would require a narrow dynamic range would be a cloudy landscape. In this scenario, you have less contrast between the brights and the darks in your image. To give you a little perspective, the human eye has a dynamic range of 24 f-stops, whereas a typical camera will have a dynamic range between 10 and 15 f-stops at their native ISO. This is how the picture would appear to the human eye. This is how the picture would appear to a camera. When the slider goes up, we lose detail in the blacks. When the slider goes down, we lose detail in the whites. This is an example of the limitations of your camera's dynamic range. Your typical video camera that doesn't have the ability to shoot in log will have a dynamic range of around 10 f-stops, whereas your high-end cinema cameras will have a dynamic range of around 15 f-stops when they're shooting in log. A very basic explanation of log is that it's a color profile that compresses the dynamic range in an image that can be later graded to increase the natural dynamic range of the camera. Don't worry if you don't have a thorough understanding of log right now. We will go more in depth in a future episode. Alright, let's talk about cameras and how they measure light. Cameras use an array of millions of little cavities that capture light. These are called photosites or photo sensing sites. These photosites are located on the camera sensors and they're used to record an image. For every pixel in an image, you have one photosite. For example, my Sony a7R II has an output of 42.4 megapixels. Therefore, each image that it takes, it has 42.4 million pixels, which means that the camera has to have 42.4 million photosites on its sensor. Upon pressing the shutter release button on your camera, or the button that you use to take the picture, these photosites are exposed and collect light in the form of photons. These photons are then stored in the form of electrical signals. The shutter speed at which you set your camera to determines how long these photosites are exposed to that light. The longer those photosites are exposed to light, the more photons they collect. The shorter amount of time they are exposed to that light, the less photons they collect. I keep throwing around this word photons. So let's go back to physics class and discuss what photons are. Photons are particles that represent a quantum of light. Upon the closure of your shutter, also again determined by your shutter speed, your photosites are closed and your camera measures the number of photons each has collected by looking at the electrical signal emitted by each. These electrical signals are then quantified into digital values. If a photosite does not contain any photons, your camera will register that as a pure black pixel. If a photosite contains numerous photons, your camera will register that as a pure white pixel. So think of a photosite as a bucket, much like a bucket holding water. The wider the dynamic range, the deeper the bucket. Alright, let's talk about ways that we monitor dynamic range. A histogram shows the distribution of light in your image from shadows, midtones, to highlights, as well as the range of tones in your image. Since we like to use buckets as examples, think of your histogram as a horizontal bucket of light. Any light spilling out of the left side of the histogram will be underexposed and will show up as pure black. Any light spilling out the right side of your histogram will be overexposed and will appear as pure white. So it's very important to control our exposure and make sure our light remains in that bucket. If light is spilling out on both the right as well as the left sides of your histogram, that means you have exceeded the dynamic range of your camera. Alright, there are two ways in order to enhance the dynamic range of your camera. The first is to shoot in RAW for photography, and if your camera has the capability, to shoot in RAW for film. But if it doesn't, you can use log. Although some low-end cameras don't have the ability to shoot in either RAW or log. The second is to shoot in HDR or high dynamic range for photography. A basic definition of what HDR is shooting identical shots at different varying exposures, from underexposed to overexposed, and then taking all of those shots and merging them in post. Although some cameras are awesome and include an HDR setting in camera, so it will do it for you. Okay everybody, that wraps it up for my class on photography. We'll see you next week.
So in this week's business class, we're going to be covering the basics of developing a business plan. This is the most important step, in our opinion, in developing a business. Without something like this, at least in our experience, we found that we lacked direction. So having all those plans and points, everything plotted out already, it kind of gave us our roadmap, if you will, of where we needed to go next. So we found our business plan to be hugely helpful. So we're going to pass a little bit of what we included in our business plan on to you. So the first step in developing an effective business plan is research, research, research. And that starts with researching other services in your area. Who's offering what? What markets are saturated? What markets are not? What gaps can you fill? Resources to kind of research what's in your area. Google, Bing, Yelp, all those major search engines. Just kind of put some feelers out there, see what other folks are doing, what they offer, and what kind of market you may have. Next step, what kind of client base is in your area? And break it down on a number of levels. So socioeconomic status, is your area a vacation destination? Do you have a lot of tourists in your area? Things of that nature, because those are all going to have an effect on which services are going to sell and not sell in your area. In our area, for example, we are right on the edge of the Rocky Mountains, so it's a pretty popular tourist destination. We see a lot of destination weddings here, so we tailored one of our websites to cater to the wedding clientele. Once you've kind of figured out what services are offered in your area and which services are not offered in your area, and you've kind of looked at what your demographic is and who you're really marketing your products to, it's time to find your niche. And your niche is your target demographic. If you do not like wedding photography and you're focused more on portraiture, then you're going to have a different niche than somebody who's focused on wedding photography or somebody who's doing wedding videography or what have you. So finding that niche. And there are niches within each of these too. So let's say you're a wedding photographer, but you prefer the posed style. That's a particular niche. There are other people who are going to prefer documentary or candid style wedding photography, which is much less scripted and planned out. So there are niches within each of these groups, and it's really important for you to define your niche. If you know what it is you like to shoot, that's going to make it easier for you to define your niche. If you're better at one type of photography versus another, again, these are all things that are going to help you find your target group and who you should market to. Once you figured out what your niche is, look at ways to reach your niche or your target demographic. Once you've identified your niche, you've got to find a way to reach that niche or demographic. If you're in an area such as Florida, where there's a much larger population of folks pushing those senior years, Facebook might not be your best option. Whereas if you're in Denver, where it's a very young community, Facebook, Instagram, things like that might serve you very well. So find a good way to reach your target demographic. Again, once you've kind of identified your target demographic, really narrow in on what services you want to offer. Once you've identified the services that you want to offer, take a good, honest look at what you do differently, at what you do that's unique, at what you do that you consider to be better. And remember, better is subjective. So take a really good, honest look at what it is that you do and how it is that you do it that sets you apart. Once you've done that, finalize the services that you want to offer. Once you've identified and cemented the services that you want to offer, consider these two things. What are you passionate about? And is it marketable? If you're passionate about it, but it's not marketable, it's no good to you. If it's marketable, but you're not passionate about it, you're not going to probably be very good at it, and it's going to end up hurting your business in the long run. So you got to find that really narrow margin that fits both those categories. Once you have an idea of the services that you want to offer, and you've taken a good, honest look at those services, it's time to decide on a business name. There are a few things to consider when picking a business name. First, is it unique? Second, is it memorable? Third, is the website available? I will share our story with you. So, please, we invite you to go to sheepdogproductions.com. You will see it is pleasantly parked by GoDaddy. It's been there for a number of years. And sadly, the gentleman who owns it does not want to return our phone calls. So don't make our mistake. We found a way around that, of course. So we have a sheepdog.productions website and a sheepdog.photography. But it would be really, really nice to have sheepdogproductions.com. Again, learn from our mistake. This is a mistake we made early on. Once you've determined that the web domain is available, make sure the Facebook page is available, the Instagram page, the Vimeo, the YouTube, the Flickr, all of those different pages where you're going to be able to reach your clients potentially, make sure those are available. If they're not, you're going to run into continuity issues. You may have a Lily Rose photography website here, but because the Facebook was taken, you're going to have Lily Rose Photography Colorado or Florida or what have you. Make sure it's available across all those domains so it's pretty easy for folks to navigate across. This one's not so important, but it does help out in the long run. Once you've done all that research regarding the name, it is time to trademark. And welcome to the wonderful world of business where everything costs money, including trademarks. So, trademark process. You're going to go through the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. They're going to charge you tons and tons of money because it's the government. It's what they do. So first, once you've decided on your name, make sure it's not trademarked too, and we should have covered that a little bit earlier, but we're getting to it now. When it comes time to trademark the name, there's a bit of a process to it, and it's a 6 to 8 month process. Initially, what you're going to do is you're going to submit the initial application. They're going to want a payment with that. I think it's in the vicinity of around $300. Submit the payment, and then what they essentially do is they kick the business world hornet's nest. And they see if anybody comes up and says, hey, no, don't let them trademark that company name because it's very similar to mine and I offer a very similar service. So, that's a breach on my business. So they basically let those hornets swarm for 3 to 6 months. If nobody gives you any pushback, at that point, they'll come back and say, yep, your trademark is approved. They're going to ask for a couple of things upon the approval of the trademark. They're going to ask for an example of that trademark in use. So one of the examples, if you're a photographer, you'll have to send them a photo with your watermark or your trademark on the photo as you would use it when you provide your photos to your clients. So for those of you photographers out there who watermark your final products, and that watermark is what you're trying to trademark, that company name or that logo or what have you, they're going to want an example of that. And then for those of you filmmakers, they're going to want an example of you using your company name or your logo in a production. So let's say you did a short film, and at the beginning of the short film it says presented by sheepdogproductions.com. They're going to want an example of that presented by page to see your watermark or trademark or logo in use. So that's going to be the last thing that they ask for, along with, of course, another payment, because why not? After that point, you've spent all the money, the trademark is yours, you effectively own that business name or logo. So once you've completed the trademark process, which we certainly recommend doing early on, because at that point, if anybody else tries to use your business name, you're protected. After that step, it's time to look at pricing. So a few things to consider with pricing. First, what are your business's operational expenses? So you gotta think, if you have any active loans for equipment that you purchased, that's gonna have a monthly charge. Insurance, monthly charge. Do you have a studio? So if you're renting a studio space, obviously that's gonna be a recurring monthly expense. Any subscription, so if you have a Creative Cloud subscription like we do to Adobe's Creative Cloud, that's going to be part of your monthly expenses. Do you have any subscriptions to websites? Are you paying monthly premiums on website domains? All of those things are going to roll into your monthly business expenses. So figure out what those are. Then figure out what it is that you need to survive. So rent, food, gas, feeding the dogs, all that fun stuff. Once you've got an idea of how much your business needs to run and how much you need to survive, then figure out what your tax rate is in your area. If you're paying 30% taxes, then you need to take all of that, add 30%, and that is what you need to make a month. If your tax rate is 25%, then you need to take, your monthly expenses plus your business expenses and add 25%. And then once you know that, you know how much you need to make a month. So let's say, for example, your total monthly expenses with taxes included is $4,000. and you want to be a wedding videographer, and you know you can complete 2 wedding videos in the span of a month. That means you need to charge $2,000 per wedding video. Now it's time to look again. Does your target demographic support that? If it can, if you're from an area where that is a reasonable price to ask, then you're all set. That's kind of a basic breakdown of how you should structure your pricing. And I understand a lot of you may be working a part-time or even a full-time job outside of this, or this may just be something that you do on the side. All of these things are going to have an impact on what your monthly targets need to be, but this is just kind of the breakdown that we use. So for example, we've determined in our area for what we have and what we want to do, our goal every month is right around 7,500. And bear in mind too, there is 2 of us. So we're covering double the ground. So that's built into how we price our different packages. So if we do a portrait shoot, we know we have 1 day to edit it, and we have to charge a minimum of X amount of dollars. If we do a wedding shoot, then we know we have to be able to edit it within the span of about 5 days, and we have to charge a minimum of X amount of dollars. So we've kind of broken that out, and we also know that we need to walk away every month with at least X amount of weddings or X amount of video projects or what have you. So we've kind of built that into our pricing, and now comes the next part. We call this make it legal. So in making it legal, make sure you're getting your tax ID number or your EIN, employer identification number. That's provided to you by the federal government when you establish your business, whether it be an LLC or a sole proprietorship or what have you. You need to get an EIN. That allows you to effectively file your taxes as a standalone business. Once you've gotten your EIN number, you're going to want to register with your local Secretary of State. Again, both of these things cost money. We apologize. You thought you were broke in college? Just kidding. You're a business owner now, and now you're really broke. We understand. We've been there. It takes, on average, 2 to 3 years to get out of that point where you're actually making money over just covering your basic operational expenses. Nature of the business, I'm sorry, folks. Hopefully it's faster for you. It's been pretty quick for us, but that's just your average. So after you have your EIN number and you've registered with your local Secretary of State, we absolutely recommend getting a separate bank account for your business. We do not recommend using your personal bank account to manage your business expenses and income. It gets really easy to blur the lines that way and miss things when it comes tax season, which, believe me, it's a nightmare. But if you do get a separate business account, you can manage your income, your expenses. You can get business checks. You can actually get a business debit card. It makes it really, really easy to track everything coming in and going out. And you can check that separate bank account to see where the business actually stands financially. So that is a really, really good way to keep track of everything with your business. Once you've set up that business bank account, make sure you're tracking all your income and your expenses. Keep receipts. Take photos of your receipts. Digitize everything you can. Make sure you have duplicates. When it comes tax season, this is going to pay off in dividends. If you cannot afford an accountant, this is going to help out immensely. If you can afford an accountant, it's still going to pay dividends later on. One of the big killers of business is incorrectly filing taxes, and then the IRS comes back, says, hey, you missed a bunch of taxes, and you don't have that money in the bank account to cover what the IRS is demanding of you, and that puts businesses underground. It plots your business, if you will. So don't let your business get plotted. Make sure you're keeping track of everything. Make sure you're putting away money from all your income to pay taxes later on, and make sure it's the amount that you're going to have to pay in your area. So if it's 33%, then 33% of your income should be going directly to your business savings account and sitting there to the end of the year when it comes time to pay your taxes. Or if you do it quarterly, then. But make sure you're saving the money to do your taxes. Now, I touched on it earlier, but insurance is really important. In fact, most places will not allow you to shoot there if you don't have corporate insurance. A lot of wedding venues will not allow you to do it. A lot of state parks will not allow you to do it. A lot of cities will not allow you to film or photograph if you do not have corporate insurance. So that's a big one. We happen to have our insurance through the Hartford Group. They've been fantastic for us. They're really, really easy to work with. There may be better options out there. We happen to go through them because we bank with USAA, and USAA is a military bank, and so they provide us some pretty fantastic discounts. that may be the way for you to go. There may be something else that's better out there. So look at what you need for your business, and that should help you determine who you get your insurance through. And I did touch on it just there, but permits, always, 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 always have permits. In the Rocky Mountain National Park, which is again on our doorstep, if you're caught shooting without a permit, the fine is hundreds of dollars. The permit's like 50. Get the permit. It's not worth the hassle. And if you're out there with a client and somebody approaches you and says, hey, where's your permit? And you don't have it, it's gonna look like you have egg on your face. It's a bad look. Nobody looks good at what you're, where did that saying come from? I don't know where that saying came from, but you know what? Nobody looks good with egg on their face. So don't let it happen to you. Get your permits. This is your warning. It's only because we love you. It's not because we want you to pay money to the federal government. It's because we want your business to survive. So permits, please. Yes, do it. Thank you. And that leads us on to our next point, finding clients. This is tough. This is not easy. We're gonna be honest with you. Finding clients is surprisingly difficult. But here are some of the things that worked for us that'll hopefully help you out. Get involved in your local chamber of commerce. This will put you in contact with the movers and shakers of your community, and it's going to build a network for you. These are the folks who have the money for your services and who are probably looking for your services. So if you offer commercial video services, these are the guys who are going to want you to build a video for their business or for their social media. These are the folks who are going to want good company profile pictures of their CEOs or their COOs on their website. So when people visit their website, they have a nice personalized picture of their management right there welcoming their clients to the page. So that's what they're going to come to you for. So get involved with your Chamber of Commerce. Again, welcome to the business world. Nothing is cheap. For us to get involved in our local Chamber of Commerce, it's $750 a year. It's expensive, but again, it puts you in contact with the big wigs in your community. And on top of that, a lot of chambers of commerce will have a newsletter. And oftentimes you can advertise in their newsletter for little to no cost at all. And that goes out to all the other major businesses in your area. So for that price, you can advertise not just on the newsletter, but in your weekly or monthly forums. And again, it's just going to help you network. And if they don't have a need for your services, they may know somebody who has a need for your services and recommend you. Next up, we have a couple of interesting services, and I'll explain both to you. But first is Thumbtack, and we love Thumbtack. The way Thumbtack works is clients or potential clients post a need for a job, and then industry professionals bid on the job. And then the client goes through all those quotes and picks whoever they want to provide that service. So the way it works is when you quote on a job, you do not get charged for quoting on the job unless that potential client responds to your quote. Now, bear in mind, is it expensive? Absolutely. When a client for a wedding responds, generally it's going to cost us around $50. But, you know, if we're closing that wedding for $2,000, then that's $1,950 that we made in profit. So still very worth it. We get a ton of our clients that way. And if you take the time and you differentiate yourself and you personalize your quotes, it makes you stand out. We close about 75% of the clients who actually respond to us on Thumbtack. So that's a really, really good ratio. The next up is Bark.com. Now, Bark is very similar to Thumbtack, the major difference being you're charged per quote that you send out with Bark. But that charge per quote is much less expensive. It's like $10 to $15 for a quote, and you get charged whether they respond or not. Another great way to network and build a client base is Facebook groups. So we, for example, we are members of Galena's Casting out here in Colorado. We're also members of Mile High Photographers out here. And jobs get posted there all the time, or people are looking for a second shooter, or they're looking for extras, or what have you. Great ways, and that's no cost to us. That's just, hey, the job pops up, we can bid on it, or we can offer our services, and they will pass that information on to their client. If the client likes it, then they pick us. Hey, we just got that job and it didn't cost us a penny. Another good way to build a client base is meetup network events. So meetup.com, you can sign up as a small business owner in your field, and they're going to post weekly or monthly meetup sessions. For example, us out here, we have it's like cameras and beer or something like that. And basically all the photographers and filmmakers in the area get together in Boulder, have a couple of beers and talk shop. And not only is it fun, but it's a great way to meet other industry professionals, figure out what worked for them, figure out what didn't work for them, and maybe you're gonna walk away with more tools for your toolbox. Also beer. And the last one is gonna cause you physical pain, I promise. Build your portfolio, which means do free work until you have a good portfolio. I know, I can hear you groaning from behind the camera, but it is effective. If you don't have a good portfolio, you're not gonna get hired. So you're probably gonna have to eat a little bit of crow, do some free work until you've built an effective portfolio, and then you can start to up your prices and say, okay, well, you know, I don't need to build my portfolio anymore, so I'm not gonna take any more free work. But until you've reached that point, hey, I know you hate it, that dreaded word, exposure, but it's real. It helps out, it'll make a difference. So build that portfolio, take the time, do it right. And even after you've established that portfolio, there may come a time where you want to branch into a new service, or you find that one portfolio is lacking versus another. So you want to do newborn and maternity photography, and you've got a lot of newborn photography, but you don't have much maternity. You might have to do a couple of free maternity shoots down the road. Then this may be after you have a successful newborn photography business. So it's something that you may have to do and you may have to revisit a few times throughout your career. But you can strategize with it, you can be picky about it, and it won't happen as often. The last thing, and this is probably the most important, do business with integrity. I was taking a small business course, and it flat out said, businesses that operate with integrity are 78% more likely to succeed than businesses that do not. And that seems like common sense, but that integrity breaks down to a number of things. Be upfront with your pricing. Don't tack on 10,000 other things when the client thinks that they're getting a wedding package for X, but it's X plus travel and this and that and the other thing. Make it within reason. When you start to tack on those things, you'll see the lights disappear from your potential client's eyes, and they're probably gonna walk. Be upfront with your pricing. Even if that means making your pricing significantly higher upfront, they're gonna be very appreciative of the fact that that is the pricing that they can expect. You shouldn't have a client who signs a contract and then at that point you're saying, okay, cool, well that's for the contract, but by the way, there's a $200 travel fee and there's room and board, so I expect a fee for that and I want you to cover X, Y, and Z. It's guaranteed to give your client a bad experience, and that bad experience is probably going to be reflected on a review on your website, and especially when you're starting out, a single bad review can sink you. So be careful, be upfront, be honest, have integrity with everything that you do with your business, and that will set you up for success. It's what we do, and a perfect example of that is we signed up for a company that helps push our website towards the top of search results. And one of the services that they offered was review management. Sounds nice. Realistically, what they were going to try and do is if we got a bad review, they were going to flood us with a bunch of fake good reviews to make that bad review essentially disappear. And it was included in the services that we got with this package, but we told them we do not want that. Do not, under any circumstances, do that because it's fake and people will see it. And we don't want that. We would rather provide a better service up front and not have to worry about it than chintz on our service, end up with a bad review and have to fall back on you guys to fix it for us. So, just one example, but always operate with integrity when you're running your business. All right, and that is all for this week's business class. Thank you so much for sitting through it. We will be back next week with more fun stuff, which will probably cost money because it's a business, right? See you next week. So as promised earlier in the show, we've got two amazing individuals on for our interview today. We've got Jeremy Kingwell and Lance Levesque, both really good friends of mine, doing a lot of awesome work in New York City. They're actually preparing for a shoot today So they're going to tell us a little bit about what that shoot entails, what they do to prepare for it, and so give you a little bit of knowledge there. And then they're a riot, so I'm sure this is going to be a funny one as well. So here we are.
Hi, how are you? Hi.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. It's so good to talk to you again, man.
Yeah, it is. It's been too long. So how's everything out that way?
It's going. It's doing pretty well. I'm doing a lot of video work and hanging out with this MOOC and doing some production. It's funny because I usually only hear about you when we're working on the project, and now we get to talk to you about the project a little bit and talk about what we do. So that's pretty cool. Thanks for having us, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for making the time to be on the show today. I know everybody in Freelance Filmmaker Nation here is going to want to hear a lot about what it is that you do and what's made you successful up until this point. We're trying to that secret sauce, if you will.
So, I mean, I guess a lot of it has to do with what the project entails, really. It kind of decides everything that you do. Decides on the gear, decides on the length of the shoot, really kind of everything's going to be different. So it kind of pays to be able to have a different sort of style for anything that comes your way if you're doing freelance stuff, obviously. So that kind of incorporates quite a bit in the gear that you use, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those of you who are not familiar with the project, the aforementioned project, Jeremy or Lance, do you want to tell our Freelance Filmmaker Nation here what it is that what this project actually is, so they can kind of get up to speed, if you will?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're currently creating a piece for the Gay Hero Project, which you're the editor. The piece itself is Will Darkangelo and the Tribe, and it's about a gentleman who lives in Fitchburg, Mass, which has for many years has a really kind of a bad reputation about the town. And this is a piece that shows the idea that there is community in Fitchburg. And he's created this community of a music group of a bunch of high school kids, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely.
And today, we're, we had wrapped shooting a while ago, as you know, you're the editor of the piece. And interestingly, you've requested a couple shots for the cut. So that's what we're actually doing today. We've been getting all of our gear together. When we wrap up this podcast, we're actually jumping in my truck and we're off to go get a couple last minute shots that we didn't think that we would need. So there within lies that issue too of this, when you're shooting, just when you think you're done, it's never really done. It's never really done. So Will and his husband Jamie have been kind enough to let us in today to do a couple pickup shots for you to make life easier in the editing room, and then we're officially done the project. So we've been putzing around here, getting our equipment together and what it is that's needed for a very simple independent filmmaking shoot. And we could go over some of the stuff with you if you wanted.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure everybody watching would love to kind of hear what it is that goes into your filmmaker bag when you're getting ready to roll out onto a shoot.
That's always that's the first thing that comes. Hey, what do you shoot on?
Exactly.
It's so funny. I love this question. It's always so fun to hear what other people are shooting on and to kind of get ideas for what you might shoot on in the future. You know what I mean?
And also the idea that this is not a there you go. He's already opening up equipment. This is not a multi-million-dollar. We're an independent filmmakers. So the reality is that we've learned to survive on sometimes what is good equipment, but not necessarily the most expensive in the world. But when one masters their equipment, to me, obviously, for me, I think story is even more important than that.
Yeah,
through the years, I've shot on all kinds of different equipment, and I started in film and in original, video, and for many years it was video on tape. And
yeah, I remember those days.
Yeah, and if the story's there, that's audiences. Beautiful cinematography is great, but if there's no story, you're just looking at beautiful cinematography, which I can look at on any roll. And where we're not a, multi-billion-dollar Hollywood, studio, we do the best that we can, make the best camera movements as smooth as we can, pay attention to our composition, and let the story unfold. I'm a huge fan of this idea of cinema verite and this idea of documentary filmmaking in which the documentarian is more of an observer. You're allowing the subjects to reveal the story for themselves in unscripted filmmaking. So for me, I think that that's really important. With that being said, we all, as filmmakers, want people to be engaged in what it is, the story that we're telling. And in order to engage them, we're going to use editing tricks that you use, and we're going to use a decent cinematography. Like, thoughts to composition, thoughts to camera placement, thoughts to how we're capturing it. Do we get close? Do we get closer? And I think that it is really important that, although it's not the end all, it really is nice to have beautiful cinematography.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the importance of the visual imagery, soaking in the audience through the beautiful visuals. I think that is very important as well. And I'm, very fortunate to work with a talented crew of cinematographers. It's pretty incredible. And having Jeremy here right now, we've got all of our equipment out, we've got our checklist going, making sure that we have kind of some of the essentials that we need.
Yeah, and actually, I wasn't expecting to go this direction, but you mentioned working with a talented group. I think so often when folks get into this industry, it becomes savage. There's competition. People don't work with one another. They hoard secrets. They hoard skills, and as a result, it's very very primal, I would say, this industry. So your approach is obviously very different. Why do you utilize the approach that you do versus kind of like that dragon in a cave, hiding all of the awesome loot and skills that you have versus collaborating, networking, and doing what it is you do? Why do you go that route?
Well, for me, simple question is, I'm an educator, I'm going on my, I think, 16th, 17th year at Keene State College teaching film production. So for me, it's part of the job is to share what I learn, and what I've learned in my own personal experiences as a filmmaker. That's something that I don't want to hide onto that stuff. I want to share that with my students so that they too can be great filmmakers.
Yeah, and for me, a lot of it is just enjoyment and getting a lot of pleasure out of just learning from other people and kind of growing that way. But also, I think one of the things that I always kind of keep in my back pocket, I think, to quote Jack White, I try to trick people into teaching me their tricks. So I always want to learn more so I can better myself and make myself a better filmmaker. So I try to surround myself with like-minded people who are also just trying to make some really cool stuff, and we all kind of learn from it, and we do better on our own, and we do even better when we're together. So it just kind of makes sense, honestly.
And what's interesting is that's counterintuitive, because this is an industry in which we need each other to survive. My projects would not get done if it weren't for the team, which includes you as an editor. It takes a lot of people to make a film, and I wouldn't want to be so insular to be making my movies alone. That's part of the greatness is that you're pulling all this talent to the table. Filmmaking is that interdisciplinary art. You're not just, it's all over the place in terms of what's needed to tell a story and make a film happen. So it seems odd, but in that competitive world, right? Yes. But in the smaller world of independent filmmaking, I don't necessarily think I see that. Because I see struggling artists who are always sharing, you know, it's whenever you get a new piece of equipment, you're calling me. Whenever Jeremy gets a new piece of equipment, he's calling me, or I'm getting Snapchat, or I'm getting a photo. You know, it's like we're all proud of what we're doing, and you know, and sharing our knowledge. That's one of the greatest parts of being an artist.
I liken it to the skateboarding culture almost, because if you look at the skateboarding culture, you could be like your first day on a board, or you could be there 40 years old, never been off your skateboard, and it's all love the whole time. It's very, very, very similar to filmmaking, I find, when, you know, it's the people that I make films with, at least.
Well, it's a click, isn't it, really? Well, not a click, but it's a niche art, right? But now with you know, 4K cell phones, and everybody's a videographer now, so it's opened up a huge world
itself because of all of that. So.
Yeah, and absolutely, and that's perfect because you know, what we're trying to do here at Freelance Filmmaker is exactly that. We want to build that sense of community. We want to start breaking down those competitive barriers. I'm not here to say, you know, competition is a problem, but what I'd like to see and what we'd like to kind of generate here is, you know, while we're competitive with one another, we're also willing to take the time to stop and help one another too. Because I think in order to be a filmmaker, there is some aspect of you that's going to be very competitive. And so fighting, and do I still have you? Oh, sorry, I got some feedback here. But I think in order to be a filmmaker, there has to be a side of you that's very competitive. And it's very counterintuitive to fight that competitive nature and slow down and make sure that you're helping out the folks around you. And it's very easy to give way to that competitive side that says, well, I want to be the best regardless of who I have to step on or anything else. So, you know, you've embodied that spirit. And I think this group has embodied that spirit, and that's absolutely something that we're trying to perpetuate here. So I think it's really cool hearing how it's affected you and your filmmaking and everything else. And I think it's really inspiring too. Just seeing others grow from your knowledge and you growing from their knowledge, and everybody just kind of pooling that skill to get better. So it's something awesome. I really do admire that.
You know, there is that road of competitive nature and cutthroat in Hollywood, and you know, that does exist, and that might be someone's path. You know, had that been the path, I would have stuck with my, you know, business management degree, you know, and pushed towards this idea of, you know, stepping over people and making great money. I mean, that, not to say that that's, you know, not a route that maybe some people take. For me, I you know, unfortunately, well, I don't know. This is slightly different. I'm kind of lost for words for a second here.
Well, it's okay. We can fix it in post.
We have to make a living, right? But at what point let me throw an example at you. If I'm making a film on someone and I show them the cut, and they say to me, I cannot, oh my God, I can't believe I'm being portrayed in this manner, or the way I look, or I'm really uncomfortable with this particular shot because for whatever reason, it's a bad angle and it's unflattering, let's say, right? At that point, you know, this is where you can be ruthless and cutthroat and say, that's the film, that's it. Boom. Or you can go out of your way and really try to, you know, appease them, think about it, reshoot it, take the shot out, you know, go out of your way to be kind to others. I think it's important, and I can't imagine if you were to like burn all those bridges every time, who would want to be in your films if people didn't think they could trust you?
Right, absolutely. And and we've actually even seen some of that.
You can think of what, Jeremy?
I said, I think that can translate to your crew as well, though. Is like if you're on set with a crew and you put together, you know, you've got your editor, you've got the producers, you've got your director, this, that, and the other, and you don't really make those kind of gives and takes as often as you'd like to, and it goes in a negative way, then nobody's going to want to work with you. And then you're back to square one, by yourself. So
yeah, and for me and with GHP and the project, this is a massive team of people. Can you imagine if I was a ruthless, cutthroat director? You know, maybe if I was paying everyone $20,000 for the day, but you know what, I'm paying them and a couple drinks and some food. You know, you have to be kind. No one would want to work with you again. And I think that comes also with age and being comfortable on a set, and just understanding to just chillax. Well, for me, it's also a documentary, so it's unscripted, so it's a lot of just chillax, get into the mode, get into the people that you're working with, just relax and let the art flow. And that's a part of personality as well. It's a part of having fun, lots of laughter, you know, having things planned and in advance so that when you're on set, that's also, you know, massive, as you know, for me, is this idea of pre-production. That you know when you're in production, you know things that you're going to need specifically, like in technology-wise, but also how you're going about it. You know, what exactly is your mission, and to make that very clear with all of the crew so that everyone knows where you're coming from and everyone knows their job and what needs to be done.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And so I know we got a little sidetracked, but tell us a little bit then, you know, so you're talking about going into production and working on set and, you know, pre-production. Tell us now a little bit about what you got packed for your day of filming.
So today, I don't necessarily have everything that my arsenal necessarily has, but like I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier, kind of really depends on what you're shooting. So I kind of just packed for today's shoot. Today's shoot is just going to be an interior kind of documentary stuff on people, you know, day in the life of almost. So really doesn't require all that much. So today I've just brought, actually I kind of overpacked, which is a good problem to have, but I've got a GH5 with Panasonic, for my A camera on a shoulder rig, with a 5-inch monitor and a matte box. What else I got in there? Using a V-mount battery to power the monitor and the camera.
Oh, nice. Okay.
I'm sorry?
I was just admiring, those V-mounts are nice. Those V-mounts are really nice.
They last forever. Highly recommend getting into either a V-mount or a gold mount battery system if you're still running off of your batteries that come with a camera. They're going to last you probably about an hour and a half, depending on the battery and depending on what kind of video you're running. But when you a bunch of these big suckers, easily get a full day shoot out of one battery charge pretty easily. But yeah, so for glass on that guy, I've got a Vedra 12 millimeter, and that's a T-stop, so that's a T 2.2.
Okay.
Big fan of that glass. That brand is coming out with, or has come out with, some really, really nice primes. And specifically for the Micro Four Thirds mount, they kind of started making for that mount specifically and then branched out from there. So working with a Micro Four Thirds mount camera is pretty ideal for that glass, which I'm pretty excited about. But T-stop versus f-stop is also kind of nice.
So for those of us who are less technically inclined, do you mind explaining a little bit about versus the T-stop versus the f-stop, how they kind of compare?
Yeah, so I mean, the general rule of thumb kind of overall explanation behind it is an f-stop is not necessarily going to be giving you the exact amount of light that it's saying, give or take. So if you're shooting at a f2.8, since that's the way that they calibrate the blades inside of there is a little bit, I mean, not loosey-goosey, but a little bit less precise, you could be shooting somewhere closer to an f3 or an f3.5 or even lower technically. But when you're working with T-stop lenses, that's going to be very specific, and you're guaranteed the amount of light that it's telling you that you're at. So if I dial down to an a T4, I'm guaranteed T4 amount of light. So it's a little bit more widely used in cinema because of that reason. F-stops are really, really utilized in photography because you kind of have that availability for that push and pull a little bit. If your exposure isn't exact when you're trying to do it right there, you're working on frame rather than 24 every second, you know? So, but in this case, I just needed a really nice wide. On that micro 4/3 mount, that 12 millimeter is going to be more of a 24 millimeter in comparison.
Yeah, because you're getting the cropped sensor there.
Right. The thing to remember about that is, though, my bokeh is going to be more of a. So it's a T2.2. My bokeh is going to be a little bit closer to that of the bokeh of an S4. But the light amount is going to be the same as 2.2. So light is always going to be the same, but your bokeh is going to change when you have that crop factor.
Gotcha. It's very interesting, and there's so much that goes into a lens. I mean, between the breathing and everything else, all these little things that you wouldn't think of, it gets really involved, very involved. And for those of you watching too, don't be alarmed if some of this is going a little bit over your head. That's fine. We will cover it in a later episode, I promise. That's what we're here for. So if you are feeling a little lost, I highly encourage you to Google it, of course, but we will cover it in a later episode. So
or
stay
you can
tuned.
just call me at home. My phone number is 559.
What is it? 867-5309. That'll get you directly to Jeremy Keem. Yeah, everybody calls it. That's why. I mean, it's popular.
12FU.
So yeah, that's going to be the main rig today. That's on the shoulder rig and on the tripod. So we'll probably be switching back and forth between shoulder rig and being on sticks. So outside of that, I've got a backup camera, which is a GH4. So GH4, GH5, they obviously play pretty well together. But the GH5 I have pretty decked out internally as well. So got the GH4 as the backup. I also have the Voigtlander 42.5 millimeter lens, which is a German company. They make the f-stop on that is a f.95.
It is.
That's gonna be gorgeous.
Beautiful lens.
So it's just really amazing in low light situations. Like today, we're probably going to be shooting in a basement. And I've got a light wand right next to me that we're going to use for lighting. But I mean, even so, we might need to open that guy up pretty big. So having that 0.95 f-stop on there is pretty nice. On that, again, going back to that bokeh versus f-stop and all that stuff, my bokeh is going to be more along the lines of probably like an f2 maybe, somewhere around there. But I'm going to have 0.95 availability of light. So it's pretty amazing for low light situations, especially with that sensor on there.
And, those light ones, they're really, really amazing. I mean, the idea of having to travel with light kits like I'm so used to, or lamps and with diffusion paper, and now it's a wand that looks like a lightsaber, for God's sake, and you literally just bring it with you. Really easy setup, put it on a tripod, you can direct the light. It's great for portraiting, which of course, as we're making documentaries, we want them to be, kind of like portrait cinematography in nature, if you will.
Yeah.
And that'll come in handy. We'll be working the two shots, as you know, because you've requested them. We talked to a newspaper article in which they are spoken about. So we have that. They've gotten the newspaper. So we're going to go to his work area and his stained glass workshop, which is down in his basement. To kind of match the footage, because that's where it comes from. So we're going to do maybe an over-the-shoulder shot of him opening the paper. So that light might be a little bit, I'm not sure what the lighting's going to be like down there, but it'll be nice to have a couple light wands to be able to, where we're just concentrating on the newspaper, we don't need any more lighting than that. So we didn't, we're not packing all that lighting up. And then the second shot that you needed was, I think we shot it in 24 frames a second, and you had envisioned this idea about some stuff happening in the kitchen in the making of the food happening in slow-mo. So,
yeah, so in that case, that's actually one of my favorite things about these two cameras is they can shoot natively in slow-mo, but more specifically, the GH5 can do upwards of 180 frames per second if you're shooting in 1080.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, if you want to shoot in 4K, you can only, I think, do up to 60 frames per second. However, that slows down very easily in post-production and looks very nice if you're using something like Twixtor or even what's built into your editing program.
So since we got two of you, we close out each show with a group of 3 questions.
bye.
So first question was, what would you recommend to a filmmaker or photographer just getting into the business? What would you recommend to them in terms of what helped you succeed? Advice.
Become a lawyer.
Am I successful?
You'll make more money.
Am I successful? Man. I would really just say,
keep at it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Personally, being kind of, I kind of redo that every day because I'm always looking for new clients and stuff like that. So I would just say, like, don't, like, as cliche as it is, don't be afraid to just go up to someone and be prepared to get a no, but just be like, hey, oh, and actually we were just talking about this the other day. I do free videos all the time. Like, I really want to work with a company and I think they're really cool and I've followed them for quite some time and I'm always thinking in my head I'd love to, do a video for them sometime. I'll just offer them a free video, you know what I'm saying? And hopefully that spawns out to something else. If not, then I can at least say I made a video for them. If they hate it and don't post it, then I won't be embarrassed. If they do post it and they like it, then, it's all extra icing on the cake.
So we know Jeremy's not coming from the ruthless standpoint of competitive nature.
He's also not rich. So let's
Starving artist.
No, but it's good. You get a lot of work out of that.
It's so little skin off any of our backs, and yet it can be like so life-changing for someone. Why wouldn't you do the favor,
Yeah.
Here and there, not all the time. Otherwise we'd be in the poorhouse, but, every once in a while it's, I don't know. Good to give out to the universe.
Yeah.
Question number 2. All right. This is the dreaded question.
Oh God, we're gonna go radio silent on you.
No, I love it.
Knock knock.
All right. What are your 3 favorite films and why?
I'm sorry. What?
What are your 3 favorite films and why?
3. It depends on the amount of day.
Right now is the day, isn't it?
3 favorite films?
Currently, I can't stop watching.
Is it currently or all the time? So
Who
you can't
cares?
do 3 favorites.
Who cares? You're a filmmaker. They get it. It's going to change tomorrow. We all get it. See, I love this question because filmmakers always argue over it and have to I can't answer that.
Well, can we do it in genre?
Oh my God, just answer the question. Just 3 random movies you love and you're irreverent about it. I can't stop watching Infinity War right now. The new Avengers movie. It's not. I mean, it's nowhere near my favorite movie, but I can't stop watching it.
That's soul punishing. That's
so
brutal.
Good.
It is. I'm still not recovered.
I agree with everything that director chose to do in that movie by killing everyone. But I thought it was so good. I thought it was a really fun movie. So right now I can't stop watching that.
This is a good one.
Trying to think of movies that I just always go back to watching no matter how many. Star Wars, every single Star Wars except for the prequels because those aren't real.
So you are a fan of the more recent ones then?
Oh, I love them. I love
all right.
Ryan Johnson went in. I love the direction JJ went in, and I'm excited for JJ to come back for the 3rd one for sure. But I thought Ryan did a great job. I have a really big issue with the original 3 because they just there's way too many issues I have with that, so I won't jump into that. But I thought using practical everything you can is the only way to make a Star Wars. So I thought they did great.
Absolutely.
And then my 3rd one I'd probably say is Blade Runner. Either of the 2.
Ooh. All right, yeah, that's a go-to. That is absolutely a go-to. You know,
Just recently.
I hear that one a lot, and you know what? I'll be honest, I have not seen it.
Which one? Either?
Well, I've seen the new one. I haven't seen the old one.
You haven't seen the original. Interesting.
No. Yeah.
Ah, interesting. Because they actually used some of the footage from the original in that, like a couple little snippets. So I'd be really interested to see if your opinion changes about it after watching that one.
You know, I think I'll have to watch the new one again because it was a while ago that I saw it, and then I think right after I'll watch the original because at that point that's going to be the order of my watch anyhow. So I'll have to
Does
give
the
that a
new
shot.
one? I haven't seen the new one.
Oh, it's
Does
wonderful.
it capture the feeling that's captured in that
Very much so, I thought.
first one?
I thought.
Oh,
See, I thought some of the scenes were a little bit too brightly lit, but I think that's more of an issue.
futuristic concept.
Well, no, I think it was more along the lines of equipment back then just was different, you know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
It's hard to recreate that unless you're shooting it on film again and you're using the
Right.
same lights again. And
Yeah.
so, what about you, Lance?
Well, you know, it is such a hard question because it's not. God, there's so many great films. So I think I'll answer the question rather than saying 3 favorite films because for me, there is no such thing. It would depend on genre. It would depend on my mood.
Oh my
it would
God,
depend
you
on the
say
time
Paul
of
Blart
day.
Mall Cop because we know you love Paul Blart Mall Cop.
I don't even know what you're talking about. I don't even actually know what you're talking about. Well, I would say that, you know, I mean, there's these quintessential films that change the world, like Citizen Kane. You know, I mean, but that's, you know, getting into academia kind of like answer, or, but the reality is it did change cinema.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Another film that changed cinema, and of course is right up my alley, is Grey Gardens. And
Grey
the
Gardens.
idea of capturing those two and their falling down home around them, and the fascinating, and that world of cinema verite where the cameras are just running and you're capturing someone's life. I think I'm very nosy and voyeuristic in that way. Is one of my loves of documentary is the idea of peeking into someone's life and seeing someone else's world. I find that actually more fascinating, which is why I'm a huge fan of documentary as opposed to fictional film.
Yeah.
Not to say that I don't like fictional film as well, but I think that I'm more engaged in learning about someone's life, someone's real story.
Yeah.
I also do have guilty pleasures, right? Like everyone else. So my guilty pleasure is probably aliens ruining the world, like anything from Cloverfield to the film Aliens, or
I love Prometheus.
Any of these like end of the world scenarios where the aliens are going to take over. That's definitely a guilty pleasure for me.
Yeah. Have you seen A Quiet Place?
I have not.
Oh, not yet.
Oh.
You need to see it. You will absolutely be blown away with it. It is so good.
Looking forward. That's a guilty pleasure. And another guilty pleasure is the new genre of crime documentary.
Yeah.
Things like
yeah.
Making a Murderer, The Staircase.
Those are great.
You know, the whodunits. Did they do it? Did they not do it? What's
Yeah.
Oh yeah. So those are like guilty pleasures. And Sherlock Holmes.
Oh, nice.
That's my other
Oh.
guilty pleasure.
Yeah.
I love Sherlock Holmes as a character, and there's such a steep history of that in cinema, and all the old ones are all free on YouTube.
Really?
You know, like all the old Basil Rathbone, a lot of those, that's all free on YouTube now. And I just loved the idea of Sherlock Holmes, and so that's another guilty pleasure.
I got to change two of my films because there's two films that I've been meaning to watch over again that I really think if you're an independent filmmaker and you haven't seen these films, I think you're going to really, really enjoy them. But one of them is The Fall with Lee Pace.
I love The Fall.
So good.
Just every single shot.
Oh.
You can pause it on any single frame, and it's just a
Eye candy. The whole thing is
Yeah.
eye candy.
Absolutely unreal. And the other one would be The Double with Jesse Eisenberg.
I started to watch that. I didn't complete it, so I'm going to have to go back now.
I love that. I just love the lighting, the camera movement, everything about it. Richard Ayoade directed it. He did such a great job with that. But those are really good, fun, independent filmmaker kind of movies, I thought.
Yeah.
And Antichrist, if you really don't want to have a good day.
Lars von Trier, I can't.
Oh, everything he does.
Yeah.
He's amazing. He actually produced a movie years and years and years ago called Dear Wendy about a very, very, very small town and these 4 kids who are pacifists who end up shooting up the entire town. Wicked good movie, but he produced that one. It's so Lars von Trier. It's got a lot of really made actors in it who were really little at the time.
One of my favorite genres of all time, too, is cult film or underground film. So things like James Bidgood's Pink Narcissus, anything that John Waters has done, anything. These kind of like outrageous, but, shocking at their time kind of films are always a fun guilty pleasure as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And The Fall. That is, I think, probably the most beautifully filmed movie of. I think it's the most beautifully filmed movie I've ever personally seen.
It's funny because Tarsem, he did. What else did he do? He did that one.
He did The Cell.
D'Onofrio.
He did The Cell.
And then, other than that, I don't. No offense, but I don't know if I really like many of his other movies.
I thought Immortals was a little lacking. I mean, it was beautifully shot, but
that's what it was.
You know what I love about movies too? Just to digress a little bit, but the idea that some of them we're tied to these films, right? So we have examples of things from childhood, right? Like Sound of Music, The Wizard of Oz, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. These like
yes,
universal stories that all children love, but also the idea that there's memory with when we go and see something. Whenever I see the film Paris is Burning, I think of Cara Kilda because we went to go see it together. When you're talking about The Fall, I think of Kev Kelsey, Hollywood editor, because he made me watch that footage. He was like, no, literally, he's like, you have to watch at least 5 minutes of this film. So we sat down and watched it, and then he gave me a copy and said, you need to watch this film. So it's funny because when we talk about The Fall, the first thing I think of is Kev Kelsey. But all movies, they kind of have a memory or memories that are created with friends or a time period in your life. And that is very interesting.
Yeah. And it has the ability to transport you too.
And also, a plug for you, but I am a fan of your latest film. And the access that you had in terms of like, for military access and telling a story. Why don't you talk quickly about your latest film?
Actually, for those of you in the audience, Gwyneth and I produced a film called 237th, The White Mountain Warriors. And it's a brief documentary on a military police unit from New Hampshire as they go through training, gearing up for a training event that is an Army-wide training exercise. So the training was very intense. We got to be really intimate with the soldiers, see what they were actually going through as they were sleep deprived and tired and wet and muddy, and really see them push themselves to a point where I think a lot of them realized that, they were capable of more than that they'd initially given themselves credit for, because they were driving themselves at rates and with so little sleep, and while they were so tired, but they were driving so hard that you wouldn't know that these guys hadn't gotten more than 3 or 4 hours of sleep in the last 2 or 3 days. And
you're capturing their character. There lies the power of the documentarian who gets to know their subject, right? So
Yeah.
you weren't a stranger to these people because you know them, right? So that gives you a heads up as a documentarian. Because people soon forget that your camera's there with you. They're really just hanging with you.
Yeah.
But you got that. And then the fact that you have this, like, military exercise, I've never seen anything like it. And it's so well done that I literally thought I was watching a documentary on Netflix. I really did. I can't wait till this comes out. This is one of my favorite new films. So there you go. That's one of my favorite films right now. Is yours.
Thank you.
Really, really good. It's something that I've never been privy to, and I think that a lot of audiences aren't going to be privy to. I mean, we see that a lot in narrative film, right? Right, like we're Platoon, and we see all kinds of war movies, but to actually see a training exercise and what's going on, I'm left with the feeling of wow, what soldiers do for us, well edited, well shot, great story, amazing characters. So looking forward to you releasing that to the world.
Thank you. Yeah, we're waiting right now on word from the New Hampshire Film Fest on if we made it in, because that's New Hampshire unit. So we'll release it in New Hampshire if we have the opportunity.
I have a good feeling about that.
Yeah. So then, last question: what resource, whether it be a podcast, a book, a movie, a documentary, what resource would you recommend to somebody that really helped you out in your growth in the film world?
Getting a job.
Literally.
Literally. No, but seriously though.
It's when it's in your hands and you're doing it.
No, but not even that. I worked at Adorama Rentals, which is Adorama is a camera store in New York City, for those of you who don't know. It's very, very, very likened to B&H.
Yep.
So I worked in their rentals department when I lived in New York for about 8 months or so. And I cannot tell you the wealth of knowledge that I learned from just working at a rental house. And then moving back to New Hampshire, the first job that I got back when I moved to New Hampshire was working at Hunt's Photo, which is a photo store, which is like third in line after B&H and Adorama, because Hunt's.
No kidding.
And they happened to have a shop in the town over next to me, so I just started selling cameras and stuff like that, and realized that I knew even less about all the different kinds of cameras and stuff like that. So I now know all sorts of stuff about cameras that I'll never use, but it's just a wealth of knowledge. Working in a rental house, probably more so, because you get to work with a lot bigger and nicer toys. I worked doing quality control, and then worked a little bit in building rigs for people who would come and rent them, so they could test them before they would rent them out. But we would rent to people like Saturday Night Live and The Daily Show.
Oh, that's so cool.
They don't own their own equipment for a lot of these segments. They just go and rent it. A lot cheaper.
Yeah.
Like every single SNL digital short, they just rent the gear. So a lot of the times their cinematographer will come and set up the gear, and you set up the gear with them and go and grab gear when they need like an extra cable or whatever. But you learn what a LEMO cable is. You learn what, when you're going to use a XLR cable instead of, a regular 3/5 jack or whatever. So that's just a wealth of knowledge, just getting jobs that you might necessarily think you might be a little above. It's always humbling to kind of check yourself a little bit and be a little humble with yourself and go do the job that you think you might be above, and you end up learning quite a bit, and it's very, very good for you as a filmmaker, in my opinion. I highly recommend that.
And I would say, although it seems like a really simple answer, Google.
Yeah.
I mean, the idea that we have the internet now, but I would have to say, so there's Jeremy's pulling out equipment. We're actually going to pack up because we're looking at our clock here as we have to shoot.
We've got the battery signal going off here, so we're same timeline, I think.
All right. So, but I think one of the greatest resources for me actually is my friends, my filmmaking friends. That whenever I have a question, the best thing in the world to do is pick up the phone and call.
Shout out Ryan.
Yeah.
Oh, shout out Ryan Chappelle. Shout out Kevin Sweet. Shout out Kevin Dynia. There's lots of people, lots of friends. For me, I find that an immense resource. I mean, how many times have I called you with questions, right? So
Yeah, absolutely.
using each other,
or vice versa.
Yeah. And also the new podcast that you shared with me. Boy, that's a really great resource as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and actually that was the first shout out. So last week we interviewed Ryan, who you just gave a shout out to, and right after that we gave a recommendation for the Indie Film Hustle. So plug number 2, if Alex Ferrari is watching.
Oh, I've been really enjoying that. It's, and it's also nice to hear other people going through the same problems,
Yeah,
and trying to
absolutely.
figure out the wave of how to get our stories out to the world.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, Jeremy and Lance, what's that?
So we're going to wrap this up, yeah?
Yeah, we've got everything. So thank you so much for coming on the show. I know Freelance Filmmaker Nation is really going to appreciate a lot of what you kind of shared, and the fact that you're going through a lot of the same things that everybody else is going through. So this struggle is not alone. You're not hustling alone. We're all doing it together. So thank you so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate it, and we'll let you get off to your shoot. Thank you so much. All right, so for this week's review, we have the Zoom F8 field recorder. It's actually this guy right here. This is our audio recorder. We love it. It is durable. It is compact. It's actually kind of nice looking too. I mean, it's fancy. I'm kidding. I'll get to the real review now. But in all actuality, we do love this field recorder. It is very durable. It has 8 XLR inputs, and we can actually program those inputs to read as left and right audio tracks. So if you've got a stereo mic, you can actually link those audio tracks together in the file format that this will produce. We can have it merge all of the audio tracks into a 8-track single file, so a WAV file that has 8 separate tracks in it, or we can have it break out into single tracks for every single one of those 8 inputs, or we can even have it set as stereo, so a left and right input, both in one single track with a mono track above that. So we have unlimited options as far as how we set this thing up to record. Beyond that, the noise floor is very low. It's actually pretty comparable to some of the basic sound devices, which are kind of the industry standard, at a much better price point. So we've been absolutely blown away with the quality of the Zoom F8. So again, it has a ton of built-in features. You can actually set your knee as a hard knee or a soft knee. Gives you high pass, low pass, all of the tools that you need as an audio engineer to make sure you're recording audio effectively. The battery life is very, very good. It takes 8 AA batteries, and what we did was we got 8 rechargeable AA batteries. So when we're done, we just pull them out, we recharge them, throw them back in there, and we just cycle those batteries through so it doesn't cost us a ton of money to keep this thing powered. But again, per charge, the battery life is very, very good. Now, some of the cons, there aren't many, but there are a couple. First is the menu system is extremely confusing. It can be a real pain to figure out. And every once in a while, we even find ourselves, and we've been working with this thing for a couple of years, we find ourselves having to go back to the drawing board and look things up and say, like, how do I do this again? Because the menu is just not intuitive. The other thing that just, it's horrible. It's absolutely awful. I don't know why Zoom has not replaced this yet, but the carrying case that you can get with this as a combo is useless. It's big, it's bulky, it's awkward. We actually had the Zoom almost fall out of the side once because the tie strap actually gave out. So the case is garbage. You're better off pulling the third-party case rather than getting the case that Zoom made for the Zoom F8. It's just not good, and it's not worth the money. But that wraps it up for our Zoom F8 review. Pretty quick, we know, but second most important piece of equipment when you're dealing with film production is that audio recorder. So if you can, invest the money It is worth it. It will save you a ton of headache down the road. Between that and microphones, the microphone I'm wearing right now, very, very good. And you can tell by the audio quality watching this video. Audio is 50% of the battle when it comes to film. If you don't believe me, watch the end of the first Star Wars movie. I'm not talking about The Phantom Menace. I'm talking about the real first Star Wars movie, The New Hope. When they're walking down and they receive those medals, watch that on mute and tell me after that that music is not important. Thank you, and that wraps up for this week's review. All right, in this week's resource recommendation, we're going to recommend a very basic screenwriting book to you, and it's very popular amongst a lot of filmmakers, and it's very understandable as to why. It is called Save the Cat by Blake Snyder. This is very much a cookie cutter book. So you're going to write one kind of script and one kind of script only with this book. That being said, it's a fantastic starter resource. So if you are looking to get into screenwriting, this is a great book to start out with. So Save the Cat by Blake Snyder. There's a lot of tools in there that you're going to walk away with that are going to make your films better. Again, highly recommended. Save the Cat by Blake Snyder. So that wraps it up for this week's recommendation, and that actually wraps it up for the episode. We will see you back here next week for another exciting episode of Freelance Filmmaker.